Tell me why HRNY decided to create a conference day around strategic management.
Well, that's a good question. We've been running fundamental series for more entry level and shorter tenured HR professionals for quite a while, and we recognized that there was a need and an opportunity to really reach out to the more seasoned professional that were looking to expand their knowledge base and really reach the C-suite with strategic HR issues and initiatives. So that's really what this is about today.
Great. And what do you hope the participants will take home with them today from the conference?
I think our goal with all of our conferences is that there's immediate actionable items that participants can take away right away so that they can be here one day, learn something, and then immediately bring it back to the office and apply it so that they're really seeing a quick return on investment, but also that they see the expanded breadth of the types of programming that HRNY has been putting on so that they can continue to spread the word about the work that we do.
What are one or two takeaways from the Strategic Management Conference today?
Well, I think that for me in the diversity session, that we have to look beyond just what we traditionally think of diversity and look at people, diversity of style, diversity of thought, and that really struck home for me because I think that a lot of times maybe a new employee is different from someone who's been there for a long time or other sort of similar situations. So for me, that was a really important thought process to go through.
One of the things that I took away today was when focusing on diversity and inclusion to really think about that concept from a global basis. So for example, what might work here in the US might not work in Korea or might not work in the Middle East. So you really need to take a global look at the local customs and practices and see what might work in that particular market and really use your local resources when implementing a plan globally.
I think my number one takeaway is how reliant successful implementation of a new project or program is on the involvement of leadership. The more leadership is actually involved in a program, especially a new program, the higher the likelihood of success for that new program.
I have two key takeaways I'd like to share. One was in the first panel when they discussed diversity. I thought the definition of diversity to mean diversity of thought rather than the typical path of race and gender was a very good insight and is something I'm going to bring back to my organization to discuss, especially in certain departments that have all the same educational background as they discussed in the panel. So that was a great insight. The second insight I would say was in succession planning in the second panel, and they discussed developing talent to fill roles that the organization doesn't have, that they plan to have based on business development and new areas in the future. And I thought those were two excellent points. So those would be my takeaways.
One takeaway that was important for me was Lee Miller's presentation about influencing an organization. And it was a you perspective when he spoke about how important it is to find out what the other person really cares most about so that you can use your influence.
There are two takeaways that I learned today. One is measuring any initiative that you start. You have to measure your successes and your failures. The other takeaway has to do with succession planning. What are the key traits in your talent when you're planning a succession planning initiative? Some of them would be social media fluency. One is having a person who's had cultural experience abroad. And the other key component is being able to communicate well.
And two things that I got out of this conference was the first was pertaining to the team model. I've heard of this team model before, but I never thought about it in the context of succession planning. In that, imagine if you had people in your organization that knew about the activities and operations of all the other departments, and then they knew how to apply the studies and their experience to the challenges of the organization. How much more cooperative would that organization be? Maybe they could come up with answers to some of the greatest challenges that we have, like the Affordable Care Act, or this social media employer branding, especially when you have people complaining about the organization. I think it would definitely make a huge difference. Then the other thing that I got out of this conference was the idea that I could actually affect the success of my persuasion and presentation skills before the actual presentation. it never occurred to me that if I set the mood just right, I could make sure that what the person hears what I intend to say instead of hearing something else that they want to hear. So I realized that the setup is very important to the presentation before it happens.
I have to say this was an incredibly informative conference, and I hope that people who were here enjoyed it as much as I did. Two that really stand out, the last session about wellness programs, we had two phenomenal practitioners who have recently implemented programs and gave us some incredibly good insights. We also had another speaker who was talking about influencing, the 3 C's of influencing: creating, convincing, and collaborating. And it was incredibly enlightening to have a better understanding about influencing. So all in all, great conference, and I look forward to next year's.